We're going through a global situation right now, which has completely shifted the way business is happening, the way teams are functioning, essentially the way the globe functions on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things as a leader that's really important to remember during this phase is that change is inevitable. Change is something that we all know is the only constant. But the very important aspect, which we often forget about change, is that it is a very emotional experience for individuals to go through. And if you were just to do a broad search in Google, the emotional phases of change, there is so much good, solid research out there that's actually been done about this. And I think it's very important for us as leaders to remind ourselves that there is this emotional layer to change. And if you just look at the 5 basic phases of that change curve, it starts with uninformed optimism. So a crisis hits, change is there staring you in the face. And you tend to, as a human, your first natural reaction is, oh, I can handle this. This is going to be easy. And then all of a sudden, the reality of that change starts setting in, and you move from a state of uninformed optimism to highly informed pessimism as you dig into the details and start figuring it out. And then as the reality unfolds even further, your informed pessimism moves into the lowest point of that change curve, which is what they term the valley of despair. And in many ways, we, during this global pandemic, have gone from those first 2 phases of uninformed optimism down to informed pessimism, right down into the valley of despair pretty quickly, because the reality has just been so global. And so the information around the situation has been numerous and in our faces all the time. And then the interesting thing is what happens as you come out of that valley of despair, you move into a state of informed optimism. It's like the inverse of the state that you have been in, where you know enough about the reality of the change that you're living through, but at the same time, you have enough data points and enough lights at the end of the tunnel to give you hope that's actually backed in reality and actual data, to be able to know that this is going to change. It's going to turn and you're going to come out of this change. And because of it, even though it may have been hard, it is actually going to yield some form of goodness. And that may take many different shapes. And once you actually start coming out of that valley and into that state of informed optimism again, you then have the ability to step back, regenerate, which is one of the topics that we chatted about in one of the previous videos, where we spoke about the need to recognize when people need to rest. And it's so important to take that very definitive point of rest when teams have come through massive cycles of change, because that is what tips the emotional state of the human from informed optimism into actual success and beyond, which is the 5th emotional state of the change cycle. And so as leaders, I encourage us all to be aware of where our teams are holistically across this emotional phases of change, but also very importantly to understand that individuals in the team and specific teams within the greater team can be at differing points. And as leaders, it's our role to enable the team to navigate across that. It's been great spending a few minutes with you guys. Just a heads up as well, we're starting to do some really interesting podcasts with some really amazing humans. Tomorrow, we'll be recording a podcast with the CEO of Media Valet, David McLaren. I've prepped some questions, which I'm going to be talking to him about on the podcast. And there's some really interesting stories that we're going to be unearthing with him. And I want to invite you to look out for that in our streams, because I think you've got a lot to learn. Talk soon.